Dr. Sandhya Kaveri ma'am, Principal of Kateel
Thank
Ashok
you.
Memorial College, to the gathering. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Radhika.
It is my pleasure to welcome the guest speaker of today's session, Dr. Rajendra Chenni, sir. I heartily welcome you, sir. I
Thank you.
would like to
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, please go ahead.
yes, I would like to welcome Mr. Manu Chakravarti, distinguished critic who has made valuable contribution to literary and cultural criticism in English and Kannada for his presence. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I consider it as my great privilege to welcome Archana Bhatt ma'am and Reshma ma'am, IQSC coordinators, Kateel Ashok Memorial College. Welcome you, ma'am. And I would also
Thank you.
like to welcome the organizer of today's workshop, Mr. Ganesh, Department of Library, KAPMI. Welcome you, sir. I would like to welcome each of the enthusiastic participants to the gathering. Welcome you all. So today we are all gathered here to attend the session 1, which is Introduction to Review Writing by Dr. Rajendra Chenni, sir. Now I request Reshma ma'am to introduce the resource person of today's session to the gathering. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Radhika. Good evening, one and all. Welcome you to for today's session. I would like to introduce today's guest speaker, a charismatic and energetic Professor Rajendra Chenni, sir, as a retired professor of English at KAPMI University, Shivamogga, Karnataka, an expertise in language and literature. He made a comparative study on T.S. Eliot and Gopalakrishna Adiga. He writes both in Kannada and English. He has authored 12 books in Kannada and 4 in English. He has received several honors, including the Karnataka State Sahitya Academy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2012, Karnataka State Sahitya Academy Award in 1987 and 2003, GSS Award in 2009, and B.A. Sridhar Award in 2012, and Vardhamana Udyanmukha Award in 1992. He has actively participated in several people's movements in Karnataka to protect the Baba Budangiri shrine against mining at Kudremukha and for saving the Tunga River. Presently, he is the director of Manasa Center for Cultural Studies, Shivamogga. So we are love to hear you from sir. Welcome you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Reshma. Let me also extend a very cordial welcome to all those who are participating in this program. Let me briefly explain the objective that we had in mind in, organizing this program, which consists of a series of lectures and interactions with participants, leading to a full-fledged workshop on how to write a book review. In fact, we began with a very unambitious and very simple kind of objective in the mind. We wanted to encourage students studying in colleges to take to the writing of book reviews. And one of the reasons for choosing this area for a workshop and for some kind of a continuous activity later on is the general feeling that many of us have that review of books have declined both in the space which they have been receiving in the literary and the cultural domains, and also the decline in the quality of the uh, reviews of books and events and the other phenomena which are significant in any field of culture. Now, it's our belief that a very healthy tradition of book reviewing can keep a climate of ideas and shared opinions alive. If one looks back at the history and the tradition of book reviews in most of the traditions across the globe, one finds that they have been very foundational in the creation of disciplines. In fact, I would even go to the extent of saying that it is the review of books and articles and essays and scholarly contributions in any domain of knowledge or discipline of knowledge, which actually perhaps led to the drawing of the boundaries and the drawing of the contours of that particular area of knowledge. We know that disciplines of knowledge developed very gradually, and most of them took a lot of time in arriving at self definition and also in marking out the territory that they located for themselves. And in this process, not only were these disciplines of knowledge more or less clearly defined, but the book reviews also contributed to retain the contemporaneity of knowledge, which I think is a very important attribute of knowledge. That if you are working in any domain of knowledge, not only do you have to connect with the past of that particular discipline, but also be alert to the dynamics of that discipline and the way in which it keeps growing practically from day to day. And in this process, it is book reviews which have made a very huge contribution. I don't intend to go into some kind of a historical overview at all. I was only trying to explain how this very important intellectual effort, which actually manifests itself in something which might look very unambitious in the form of a short critical evaluative essay, to which we give the name book review. These have performed very important functions, and I would say at least three of those functions are very significant. One is creating a sense of intellectual curiosity about various domains of knowledge. In fact, one can argue that interdisciplinarity has been kept alive by book reviews, because whatever may be your dedication as a scholar or a student to a particular discipline, it is these book reviews which keep you alert about many of the new things which are happening in related and other disciplines. So, one is the way in which intellectual curiosity and then some at least a competent acquaintance with other disciplines is created by book reviews. The second is keeping a climate of ideas and shared opinions available for readers and scholars. This also is a very important function. That scholarship does not happen in a vacuum. Scholarship is always monitored and in a way shaped by uh, shared concerns and preoccupations, frames of reference, and also the frames of thought within which scholars and writers work. So I think it is book reviews which give us at least the first important impression of the contemporary climate of opinion, and then the frames of thought and discussion which have been made available by the developments in various fields. And another, of course, is that it's a kind of an intellectual exercise through which we can hone up our own critical thinking and writing. In fact, the major objective we had in our mind was to make use of book review writing as a means of teaching our students critical writing and critical thinking, which are very essential. And we also felt that one of the important things is to prepare our students for participating in intellectual and cultural debates. And this requires certain skills and abilities. One, of course, is the ability to read and comprehend, summarize the major arguments, and present them with some degree of clarity. Uh, these skills are very important, and we thought that uh, talking to our students about how to write a book review would at least provide a preparatory phase towards that. These were the objectives that we had in our mind, and we thought until the program began that most of the participants would be from the undergraduate courses, but now I find that we have research scholars, and we have teachers, and those who are not very new to uh, the topic that we are dealing with. Therefore, today's session would be only an introductory session and a very preliminary introduction at that. I have already spoken about the importance of book reviewing um, in creating the essential awareness of the frames of thought. Let's spend a little more time over this. Um, One of the advantages of constantly being in touch with review of books in the academic and scholarly journals is the realization that many of the frames that we had taken for granted have been interrogated, if not replaced, and very serious questions are asked constantly about the usefulness of these frames of thought, which have been in existence for a long time. And then the book reviews also make us alert about the exhaustion of certain frames of thinking, which probably energized intellectual work during a particular phase. The example that comes to my mind um, the status of post-colonial theories at present. Beginning with the work by Edward Said and a number of scholars from the erstwhile colonies, post-colonial theory began to occupy a very hegemonic position, to such an extent that it became an explanatory framework for the understanding of history, for the development of cultures, and for the understanding of cross-cultural interactions between the so-called native indigenous cultures and the imperial cultures, etc. And this broad framework produced a large body of highly interesting and challenging scholarly work. But after passage of time, we all began to understand that these frameworks um, uh, uh, probably do not have the potential that we expected as explanatory frameworks. And we also realized that if these frameworks are continued to be employed, they might lead to very reductionist understanding of several very significant things. This led to two things. One, of course, is the reformulation, which is very necessary in any particular intellectual framework, and that did happen with post-colonial theories. There was a revisiting of many of the foundational concepts, and then there was also a fairly healthy debate on the nature of the application of those conceptual frameworks. But then, as one should probably expect, we reached a stage when we began to wonder if this framework has perhaps reached a state of exhaustion, and probably we need to begin afresh in trying to understand this historical phenomenon of imperialism and the impact it made on the on several things, understanding the way we use languages, the new hegemonies which are created, and the new forms of resistance which have manifested themselves in history. This is just one example. So we also began to feel that most of our social sciences have a very complex genealogy, in the sense our very way of reading certain texts and also trying to understand the social structures is probably probably it is, I do not want to use the word distorted, but I would certainly say it's a bit curtailed by the very unique genealogy of our social sciences during the colonial period. And after the inception of these social sciences, which did two things. One is to provide us with a foundational framework. The second is to provide a lens through which we try to understand the social structures, etc. And the realization came to us that probably this colonial genealogy has much to do with certain weaknesses of the frameworks which have occupied these social sciences. And there again, there was the felt need to probably historicize these social sciences themselves, and also question the universalist frameworks which they were laying claim to, and then probably begin to revision the social sciences. Now, where do book reviews come into this intellectual effort? I believe that if full-fledged, serious, intellectually, powerful works can perform the function of bringing about paradigm shifts in a field like post-colonial theory or in the employment of the social sciences. Book reviews can also contribute in a big way because the map of the work being done in the scholarly world is very large and always expanding, and these are also very important contributions which gradually begin to challenge the frameworks with which we had started the scholarly work in a particular discipline. This, I think, is also very important when we look at what book reviews can do. And the other is we need to be a little skeptical about many of the hierarchies we have created in the field of writing itself. By hierarchy, I am specifically referring to the distinction that we make between brief, evaluative, critical essays, which go by the name of book reviews, and then the so-called solid scholarly tomes or volumes. It's my experience that this hierarchy has led to a certain unwelcome factors, in the sense one is that the field itself gets narrowed to a small number of authorities within quotes in the field, and to that extent the space meant for new editions also gets reduced, and we need to create a scholarly space for this kind of an intellectual activity, which may appear to be preliminary from one perspective, but it might lead to very important things. As a student of literature, I would like to remind myself that some of the so-called classics of literary criticism, which have now gained the status of very significant texts in the field of literary criticism, were originally published as book reviews. I have in mind the contributions made by Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot and a large number of poets and practitioners and scholars during one particular phase. And uh, the important fact here is that this form of writing, which naturally developed its own tone and mode of address and its own a slightly different kind of readership and audience, was also trying to create a certain kind of reception for the new writing. That's, I think, is what happened with the little journals of the period that I am referring to, namely the period which led to the high modernist phase. And if we go back to the earlier phase of the 19th century romantic period and then the Victorian period, and these two periods were known as the two major periods in English literature, where journals became so extraordinarily prominent, and probably the most provocative and prominent aspects of the journals during both the phases were the book reviews. And I think in both these phases, the phase leading to the major work in the Romantic movement and the period leading to the inception of high oral literary modernity. The important literary challenge was to create a taste and a preparedness to receive the new kind of innovative and experimental writing. And I would like to argue that this was done majorly through the reviews, which of course led in both phases to a lot of acrimonious debate, and the reviews also led to struggles even within the educational and pedagogical institutions. I need not take you through the details of the history of these two periods, but we all know how a new innovative form of writing, which is always a product of very significant paradigmatic changes within a culture, finds its reception mainly through the contribution made by book reviews. And that I think is essential in our own period, because we have also been going through in recent times to probably one of the most devastating transitions in modern history, through the processes of globalization, etc. And very large questions are confronting us now. Questions like how have literature and the arts responded to these extremely destabilizing transitions and changes? How have different domains of knowledge tried to negotiate with these very deep and cataclysmic changes? What are the new registers and the idioms of expression created not only in literature but in scholarship and in the arts? What exactly uh, is the contemporary remapping of the knowledge worlds? What exactly is the relationship between the production of literature and arts and their reception when the institutional foundations which had been laid down for the understanding and for establishing a relationship with these have changed so drastically? So the once again the challenge is to understand two things simultaneously. One is the very nascent um, environment in which new forms of expression are manifesting themselves, and the other are these changes that I have been talking about. And one may differ in one's assessment of the nature and impact of these changes. I see these changes as phenomenal, as enormous, and as extremely challenging. And it is during such a period of transition that we need to rely on the review of books and art events and cultural events, in order to get that kind of an intuitive understanding of those changes, which may appear to be rather too subtle, though they are products of such very huge challenges of history. Now, this is the background against which one has to talk about review of books. And the other challenge before us is the way in which the space for all forms of expression is getting reduced. Let me give an example from the field of Kannada journalism, with which I am associated in a very small way. One of the things that writers of my generation have been talking about is the huge reduction in the space given to review of books in some of the journals and newspapers, which I think had acted as a bridge between the imaginary person called the common reader and the world of literature and art. You know, a fair amount of space used to be devoted to review of books, and what has been witnessed in Kannada circles, I'm sure, has been witnessed elsewhere also. In the name of several things and because of several factors which are financial and economic, and also probably more importantly changes in the structure of the classes which involve themselves in art, literature, and culture. What has happened is there has been a reduction, a literal reduction in the actual space given to book reviews. And as I hinted at the beginning of my talk, this has been accompanied by a decline in the quality of book reviews too. And this, I think, is symptomatic of something that should be addressed very seriously. There may be explanations, by way of the reduction in the readership of these journals and magazines, etc. There may be arguments regarding the huge challenges posed by the social media and the digital platforms, etc. But with all that, one has to see this symptomatically as something that needs to be addressed seriously. I do not know how many of you would agree with me that I am trying to relate the reduction given to the space for book reviewing with something quite serious, which has much to do with the health of a particular culture. And by decline of quality, I have in mind the way in which book reviews are now being redefined in a drastic way. And if I have to characterize these changes that one can observe, what we can see is uh, the casualness and the lack of seriousness, which has now transformed book reviews into mere exercises in drawing attention and coming out with opinionated statements. This is one thing that at least I have been observing, in the sense, essentially, book reviewing is a very serious activity which aims at assessing and evaluating literary and scholarly works with reference to these broad cultural and intellectual frameworks. Therefore, whatever may be the brevity of a book review and whatever may be the restrictions which are imposed on the book review as a form of writing, it performs a serious function. And what one observes now is the reduction in the space as well as the decline in the seriousness with which the book reviews are written. And then this has also led to a very perfunctory and superficial negotiation with many forms of writing. In the sense, uh, it has to be taken for granted that a book review uh, definitely and very uh, confidently makes a critical and evaluative statement, and the critical and evaluative statement goes uh, with a certain frame which helps the reviewer to make his assessment and his critical comment. It also means that a reviewer takes upon himself the responsibility of relating himself seriously to a domain of knowledge or a discipline to which that particular book or writing belongs, which he is reviewing. And the responsibility is of, continuously keeping in touch with the developments in that particular field, and also being aware of the priorities of that field, and also being aware of the way in which a certain certain new areas of exploration and experience are being created. So it's a responsibility which the reviewer has to to not only uh, be aware of the nature of that particular domain to which the book belongs, and it should also have the sensitivity to state very clearly the small or the big contribution which this particular book makes to that domain of knowledge. Instead of that, book reviewing seems to be becoming more and more exhibitionist, in the sense there is the exhibition of the deliberately cultivated style of the reviewer and the tone of the reviewer, and also of coming out with very broad and blanket statements. And something has to be done in order to repair this. Therefore, we thought we could do something about this state of affairs. And after today's um, the introductory meeting that we now have, we plan to invite scholars, and especially those who have been writing reviews in the areas of social sciences and literature and many other fields, and allowing them to share their own experiences. And as far as the student community is concerned, we would like to share with them the best of the reviews, and acquaint them with journals which have devoted themselves seriously to book reviewing. And this shall be followed by um, workshops in which training can be given to the the younger scholars and the students, and there can also be space for um, mm, adding to uh, this process of once again reviving the intellectual culture which can nourish the activity of book reviewing. These are some of the preliminary statements that I wanted to make today. And I would request the participants to share their views, because the purpose of today's meeting is only to exchange our views and ideas and plan for uh, for the, the meetings we are going to have in the future. May I now request participants to contribute uh, their ideas. Yes. Yes, please. Manu Chakravarti.
No, I think
Ah,
Professor Chenni has provided a perfect setting. In fact, we would be able to respond more if there are responses from the participants, if there are specific questions, inquiries. And in fact, I will attend all these sessions, and I'm eagerly waiting for the sessions to begin. And as Professor Chenni said, this is not just a review of literature, but from the social sciences, arts, in fact, various kinds of reviews. And I don't know if we should even throw it open to how reviewing can be done in relation to other art forms. Maybe that would be a little too ambitious, but I think we have had a perfect setting right now. More keen on listening to the responses of the participants. And if there are specific questions, both Professor Chenni and I could answer those questions. Please go ahead, because I think this is a very, very innovative program.
yes. Ganesh.
Sorry, sir.
Ah, are there any questions? Okay. If you have questions.
No, sir. Like Maimuna Zoya is asking for student,
Ah,
sir, how do you define book reviewing?
okay. A book review is essentially a critical essay. It is structured in the form of a critical essay, though, of course, uh, the space usually given to a book review is not very long. Therefore, uh, it, a book review has to perform at least two or three functions. First of all, it has to introduce the book to the readers. And by introduction, we do not mean only a summary of the content of the book. The book review has to, of course, first mention what the book is about, the area to which it belongs, the discipline to which it belongs, and also immediately after this kind of a brief introduction, you should try to introduce the reader to, in a way, explain why this book is being reviewed. And this can be done first by placing that book. A book review is an effort to place a book uh, within the framework of that area of knowledge. For example, if I'm reading a new book on clinical psychology, I have to begin by placing that book. And in a serious book review, this would also mean that I locate that book with reference to the frameworks which the book itself is using. In a sense, what kind of a theoretical approach is being employed in that book? Does the author relate himself to a certain kind of stance or approach in clinical psychology, or it could be any of the social sciences? So a book review it should aim at locating the book being reviewed in the domain of knowledge by relating its content to what is happening in that particular domain of knowledge, and also draw attention to the way in which the author of the book is relating himself to the methods and the approaches and the areas of exploration which we generally attribute to that discipline or that particular area of knowledge. Then the book review should also draw our attention to the major argument or the thesis of the book. I've already said, and I'm explaining it in detail because you're a student. What you need to do is to introduce the reader to the thesis or the main argument of the book. A book review does not permit you to go into all details, but the focus should be on the main argument or the hypothesis which is presented in that particular work. Then, of course, you also have to place very briefly before the reader the set of arguments which the author has employed in order to either support his own main argument or to justify his argument. And after doing this, a book review also has to evaluate this argument as well as the structuring of the supporting evidence given there. And then both the strengths and the weaknesses of the book need to be highlighted in the book review. And lastly, and most importantly, a book review has to at least hint at, in however small a way, the difference or otherwise that this book can make to the particular area of study of knowledge. This is how one would define a book review, and it's different from a major critical essay yeah, on many counts. Mainly, I would say it's it depends on two things. One is the focusing on what is central to the text. You don't have the luxury of looking into the other arguments, the subsidiary arguments, etc., in a book review. It has to directly focus on what major argument the author is trying to present in the book. This is how I would look at a book review. So it's essentially a critical effort. It's a critical effort in stating one's comprehension of a text, first of all, and then also an intelligent response to the book, an intelligent response to the argument in the book. This is something that has to be done in a book review. But of course, as you will see in the major practitioners of this form of writing, very great things can also be accomplished within the framework of a book review. Yes. Any other questions, responses?
So we can unmute and ask questions if we have anything.
Yes.
Hello, sir.
Ah, yes.
This is Shudrapa, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, is book review interdisciplinary act? Is book review is interdisciplinary act, sir? Does it have an interdisciplinary?
I would put it this way. It's not that every book has to be interdisciplinary. It all depends on the kind of book that you are reviewing. One of the constraints for the book reviewer is that many things are dictated by the book selected by him to review. If the content of and the style of presentation of the book itself is interdisciplinary, naturally it demands an interdisciplinary approach in the review itself. That's one thing. The other comment I was trying to make was, since we have been living through a period where the disciplinary boundaries have been disappearing, and there seems to be a huge amount of exchange of ideas and frameworks among the disciplines. Perhaps a good book review written now at present is more likely to be interdisciplinary than probably book reviews were earlier. And that's how I would answer your question. Not that one has to take up an interdisciplinary approach in every book review. It all depends on the kind of book that you are reviewing. But since we are part of a climate of ideas, which believes in drawing from various fields of knowledge, the book review also is likely to be interdisciplinary. Only the other day I was reading reviews of the latest James Bond film, and what I could see is that these reviews are very different from the kinds of film reviews we used to read maybe a decade ago, where the belief was that films occupy a very separate space altogether, and if you're talking about films, you would be doing it in a very well defined map where there were notions of what is a film, what does a film do, how does one make a film, what are audience responses. But what I could see in the reviews of this film is that the very register and language used there draws a great deal from postmodernism. It draws a great deal on the fields of politics, on the kinds of evil that the human world is now confronting and how we negotiate with that. All this it in a way enters into a review of a James Bond film. So I think that is in support of what I was trying to say, that a book review is part of a uh, part of a climate of ideas. Yes.
Sir, one more question.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, abundance in book publishing at present scenario has any impact on the quality of a book review, sir?
Abundance. I'm not very sure of that. But if one is talking about the enormous number of titles of books that one comes across on the social media platform, and also in the other channels of communication, one could of course speak about abundance. Now this has led to certain distinctive challenges, because the pressure is somehow to acknowledge the the printing of such works, and then the way in which they are now circulating, maybe in the different readerships that we have. The very process of acknowledgement has led to other modes different from book reviewing. For example, rating of books, and then the so-called readers' responses, and very brief exchanges of comments, both positive and negative, which are very surprisingly very instantaneous, etc. And then book reviewing, as I said, has been losing its space, and that lost space seems to be now being occupied by a kind of advertising of books and art events, etc. This is a unique challenge that we have vis-a-vis the abundance that you were talking about. And then another aspect that one needs to look at, not from a very conservative or puritanic point of view. I mean, the book reviewing always went with a certain kind of institutionalizing also, in the sense the journal, the scholarly or the popular journal itself would be an institution with its own hierarchies, which decided which books or which artworks would be reviewed, by whom, and how much of space would be given to each of them. This led to a number of, prejudiced writings, and also a kind of illegitimate bias for or against certain things. Now, the abundance of not only books, but also comments and brief writings and messages about books has, in a way, dented this institution. I think it has challenged that, which might possibly lead to some good things. But the negative side of it is, in a way, abrogation of responsibility. Because there was a time when, by reviewing a book, you would also accept your responsibility. Responsibility in the sense, you would always be aware that you are making an important statement about something that happened in the field of culture, and your statement makes you responsible for what you have said, and that I think is now being abandoned. I mean, This might be a subjective impression that I have. These are two distinctive challenges which have come up because of the abundance that you are probably mentioning. Manu, your response to this question?
Uh, Shivarudrappa, I would also say, as a different extension of what Professor Chenni pointed out, that I would also ask you to take a look at what's happening, especially in Malayalam and Tamil. If there is an abundance when it comes to publication, they also have this. Kannada used to have it, but it has almost disappeared, if not totally disappeared, of little magazines, little journals. So, in fact, they're able to accommodate all kinds of writing, and uh, a certain degree of intimacy I have with the Tamil little magazines. They take care of all these things in a very, very open manner. In fact, Kannada journals, magazines, almost critical essays, almost critical because they were more than introductory essays. The book reviews almost used to be quite exhaustive in nature. That's what Professor Chennai is pointing out too. Have almost disappeared, and newspapers give no space at all. Even in Kannada, they just most of them are sadara swikara, accepted with thanks, just an acknowledgement. So there were days when we would have almost half a page, three-fourths of a page of review. But I think we should also draw certain lessons from the Malayalam and Tamil little magazines. This would be my response, Jenny.
Yes. Professor Manu Chakravarti was mentioning how journals and some of the newspapers have tried to wriggle out of this problem of confronting abundance of publications instead of what Professor Manu was describing as exhaustive reviews, very comprehensive reviews, which were very, very close to full-fledged critical essay in form. Now we have only acknowledgement, and then it's somewhat surprising that even very serious journals in Canada today, they are now resorting to a half a paragraph or one paragraph acknowledgement come review. It's supposed to perform both the functions. I think this is what we are now witnessing, and in comparison to that, the little journals, which of course performed the highest, I should say, cultural functions, despite addressing probably a minority readership and despite probably not reaching, I mean, different classes in a culture or society. They did perform a particular function, and I can still remember the anxiety with which writers would await a review in a particular Kannada journal or the Sunday edition of a newspaper. That I think is reduced very greatly, and that the point made by Professor Manu about how things are quite different in Malayalam and Tamil makes me bring this before you for a discussion. Book reviews, I think, are closely related to the literary and artistic cultures, in each of the bhashas and in each of the of what I would describe as a literary, social, political region. In the sense, there's a vast difference in the way in which the reviews are either read or received, um, and the importance which is given to them. And I think that also has something very important to do with the larger things which are happening perhaps in that particular culture. What I mean is, they are book reviews are also indicators of what is happening within a particular literary or cultural tradition. The more responsible the book reviews are, the more original the book reviews are, one can safely take it for granted that to that extent, the vibrancy of that particular language or culture is assured. All right, are there any comments, responses?
Sir, Sangeeta Patil has raised a question. Do you think nowadays
Ah,
book reviews play role of book promo?
yes. Whether they are performing the function of promoting a book. I wouldn't say that this is a feature only of contemporary book reviewing. All said and done, the field of book reviewing has been a very mixed one throughout history. It has not been totally free from all these pressures, the pressures of advertising a certain kind of book or writing, etc. The question is a good question because it is drawing our attention to you know, the fact that a book review is basically a critical assessment. It has to be an assessment, whereas promotion, even of a good book, if it were only promotion, would not be the expected function of a book review. Because even if one is promoting a potentially good work which is now in circulation, merely promoting it would not be the responsibility of a book reviewer. Something more serious needs to be done. And unfortunately, there is a competitive atmosphere here uh, that one sees, where instantaneous publicity and that kind of attraction for this particular book. It gets done through book reviews. Uh, that is not really a very acceptable thing that is happening. Yes. Um, I think we'll be soon running out of time. So there are two other things that I want to place before you. As I said, we want to involve more and more of our students in this process of learning about book reviews. And we want to encourage them to read books in different areas and learn to read those books critically, think critically, and also learn the very important skill of talking about those books, or of presenting one's opinions about those books. And this we want to do, first of all, by organizing talks and workshops, then inviting book reviews from our students, and then not only shall we be sharing the better ones of the reviews which young scholars and students write, so that it reaches at least one small community of serious and interested readers. Then we are also planning to bring out these reviews in book form, because we think it is very important, not only in e-book form but also in print, hoping that this might lead to a culture of book reviewing, where we begin to feel that there is a community here of focused and interested readers who want to make statements about books and who would want to uh, participate in our readings and debates about books and art and cultural events. With your suggestions, and if you have more suggestions, please share them with me in this group. I hope we will be able to fashion a program which will be useful on the one hand to the young scholars and readers, but also will sustain the interest of many whom I have been talking to in this preliminary session. So we shall be communicating to you the next session in this series on how to write a book review. And I would like to thank you for responding to our invitation. And I hope you will be with us as we continue with the program in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable words. And I also like to thank Manu Chakravarti, sir, for his presence.
Yes. Can we conclude here then? Thank you. Thank you, participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chenni. Thank you, Radhika.
Thank you.
I look forward to the meetings to come. I'm really, really looking forward to what is to follow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So now the session is concluded. Everyone can leave. Thank you.